So we're going to talk about Saigon some more, popularly currently known as Ho Chi Minh City in the Republic Republic of Vietnam. Um, and these are during the time I was there from 1967 to 1969 in Vietnam. And in Saigon, I was there in 1968 and to the really late spring of 1969. And I was in Saigon. I was developing a magazine, cultural magazine, for the 135,000 Vietnamese employees of the U.S. government called THONG CAM, THONG, second word CAM, which means mutual understanding in Vietnamese. And I lived right in the heart of Saigon. I lived in the Splendid Hotel, which is a block from the Presidential Palace, now known as the Reunification Palace. And by the way, if you get to Saigon, do not miss going to the Reunification uh, uh, um, Palace. It is as Vietnam was and the day it fell, South Vietnam fell. They preserved everything, and it's absolutely fascinating, well worth it. And next door is the old USAID building, which is also a museum. Anyway, we'll talk about what to see in Saigon another time. So let's talk a little bit about what life in Saigon was like. Um, and I lived in a splendid hotel. I lived on the fifth floor. I had a roommate, but I hardly ever saw him. He was, I think, a Marine. He was out uh, creating mischief and mayhem most of the time. He would come back in, he'd stand under the shower for hours and hours and so on, but then he would vanish again off to do more of whatever he was doing. Um, the piastre, which was the Vietnamese money, was pretty much worthless. It was hard to maintain a steady uh, value of the piastre. So the United States, and which had done elsewhere, is actually printed up script. Okay, and you had $1, 25 cents, 50 cents. It's script, and had it was issued, and so when you went got a check or then they gave you script, and you could spend that pretty much anywhere. But periodically, you had there was a black market in this currency, and when there was, then that began to destabilize the economic kind of balance in Saigon, and that did not please the U.S. government and the powers that be. And I remember being there one day when they just like that, your currency was no good, and then you were issued new currency. But they did one other thing about that time, and they dragged a businessman who happened to be a Chinese businessman into the central market at noon one day, and they shot him. And that was really the kind of the end of currency, playing around with the currency and black market and all that. At least for a while. The rest of the time I was there. And by the way, it's very effective. You don't have to do much. You probably don't even need to shoot the guy except in his foot or something to for everybody else to decide, gee, that's really a bad idea, and they stopped doing that. And when Ferguson happened, when the Black Lives Matter thing, and there was this big thing in Ferguson, Missouri, and they had struggled around and et cetera, et cetera. I said to somebody, I can sell this thing, you know. It's as simple as this. You come up, because the kind of people you're dealing with, demonstrators and so forth, they're not heroes. So you come out here with your 40 finger, bam, in the air, watch people, and if they don't scatter sufficiently, you go bam, and shoot a guy in the foot, and that is the end of it. Instead of having people get killed and so forth. So, okay, that was currency. I flew in and out of Thompson Airport a lot in those days, um, because I was going up country and I was doing a lot of things on behalf of the magazine. The way the magazine worked, was I would spend 2 weeks up in Japan at the Printing and Publication Center, being hosted by our psychological operations up there, which is I think they were the 7th PSYOP Battalion. I'm fuzzy. Uh, but anyway, I'd fly up, and I had to talk to the the printing people who were printing the magazine, and I had to also do a little negotiation for our color separations and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But mostly, I was down the Hilton Hotel downtown getting drunk. And then after 2 weeks, I'd fly back to Saigon. And we would do the way I ran the magazine. I had basically a Vietnamese editor of it, and of course, I was the final authority on all this. But we would have a meeting on Saturday morning, and we had a staff of 10, and you all come, and we all sit down, and we'd say, okay, where you guys been this last week, and what do you got? What are your ideas, and so on. We always had to be working um, three magazines ahead, because I was directed. The idea was to get this magazine to 135,000. Do it within no more than 9 months monthly, with two kinds of publications. They're going to be 48 pages, 4 color, and then we're running the black and white English edition in what color was it? Black and white. Black and white. And I think it was a 1-to-10 ratio. So we print every a black and white for every 10 that we had there. Main problems, which when we get around to talking about the magazine in more detail, biggest problem I ever had was is distribution. Same problem we had running a weekly newspaper twice. Same owning a daily newspaper. The distribution is a challenge, and that's the one that is a challenge. Well, in any case, we're going to talk about Tan Son Nhut. I was told, and you can probably pretty well convince me, that Tan Son Nhut was the busiest airport in the world at that time. We were flying a lot of stuff in and out of Tan Son Nhut, which was and is today the airport. If you fly into Saigon, you'll fly into Tan Son Nhut. But we also had a military base out at Ben Hoa, which was outside Saigon by about 10 or 20 miles. When most people came into the country, now I came in on a ship, but most people were flown in directly from the West Coast and would land at Ben Hoa and then would be spread out around the country. But as I say, I think I flew into Ben Hoa. Never. I don't think I ever flew into Ben Hoa. I flew out of Ben Hoa the late in the afternoon on the final day that I was in Saigon. But when I would go back and forth to Japan, I would fly on, man, I can't quite remember, but they weren't flying the commercial boat. Maybe they were sometimes. But that flight would go out to the Philippines and then out to Taiwan and then on into Yokota. So it must have been a Yokota in Japan. So it was kind of a long flight, and there were 727s in those days. Anyway, and there was a room, which you don't have in commercial flights today. So anyway, we were coming in one day. We were flying in the O2, which was essentially Cessna Super Skymaster. If you don't know what that looks like, look it up. But it's a twin-engine plane, but they're in line. So you got this is front of the plane, kind of top here, and then the back of the plane kind of top. Very durable. It's like a sports car. I love that plane. And that's the plane that they taught me how to fly, and I flew it. I'm not a pilot. Never was a pilot. And the only reason they would do that, the Air Force guys would do that, was so that you would, if something happened to the pilot, there's a chance that I could get them down and plant it. And chances are I could do that. I got pretty good at it, actually. So anyway, we're coming in to Tan Son Nhut. And Tan Son Nhut tower was run by the Vietnamese. And so they an English accent. Now, it was in English. You know, I think all of airport towers in the world, I think, are done in English, but don't hold me to that. But I think they must be. Uh, but anyway, so we're coming in, and we're. I wrote down that we were number 27 to land, and then I thought, God, couldn't have been 27, and then it may be 9. But in any case, we were cleared to land. Now they're bringing jets in 707s and 727s, and if you get caught as a small plane in the backwash of one of those planes, they'll flip you in. It'll be a bad day, let's just say, for you if you're on that plane. So on this particular day, we had the way you identify yourself is and then number flight 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say, and the tower clears us, and then he's talking to 1, 2, 3, 4, but doesn't make sense. There's not. He's got us confused, and the reason he has confused is there was another plane that had our same final identifying numbers, and that other plane was 727 or 707 or whatever. And if we land, okay, they're going to overrun us and squash us like a bug. And if we land behind them, they're going to flip us. And the tower couldn't get it straight. He couldn't, I'm talking to you and talking to them. They didn't really, he couldn't figure out that he's talking to 2 different people. So my pilot, the plane I'm in, talks to the pilot of the jet, and the the jet guy says, "Okay, get down. At the end of runways, there are arrows. Okay, land on the arrows. Okay, get down as fast as you can, and I'll come in high over you, and then just run for your life. So once you're down, okay, get off the runway as fast as you can." So we came in and landed, and then and we ran off and did that. The other Townsend story I have is I came in late one night. I was in up country doing I don't know what. But I came in, I'd probably been delayed somewhere, didn't catch the flight didn't come in at the time it should have, whatever. In any case, it was late, and when I landed, it, basically, uh, I could wind up spending the night on the tile floor, sleeping or not sleeping at Townsend. But I called our office downtown, our unit downtown, down in the rail yard, and I said, send out a Jeep. And the duty officer that night said, do you really want us to send a couple of guys in a Jeep through Saigon in the middle of the night because, there's possible mischief and so forth and so on. And I remember saying to the guy, well, how much mischief has there been lately? He said, well, there hadn't been anything. But I said, well, send it in a Jeep. I'm not going to spend the night out here. And so they did. And the guys come rolling in. They've got a machine gun. They're wearing their helmets. Just like, and I'm realizing I ran these guys through Saigon in the middle of the night because I didn't want to sleep on the tile front of them. Don't do that again. That's pretty pretty irresponsible. And of course, there wasn't any problem at that on that night, but it just wasn't a nice thing to have done. Okay, now we tell the story. I had a Jeep, and I would park my Jeep. Where else could you park it? I'm living in a splendid hotel. The embassy's a couple of blocks that way. The palace is right here. The Continental Hotel and the Rex, which has become some kind of Rex Hotel. The roof of the Rex Hotel has become some sort of big tourist. I don't get it. But anyway, so I parked my Jeep outside, and we had guys supposedly guarding it. And I must not have brought the Jeep over every night because I remember walking the couple of blocks through Saigon, downtown Saigon, over to where the rail yards were. The rail yards, by the way, have been now done away with, and it's a beautiful park. And it was beside the Sportif, Sportif, which was the French club, recreational club, essentially, and still there. And it was adjacent to the presidential. Anyway, that's where I lived in a nice area and beautiful architecture and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, so the Jeep's out there, but when the Jeep was out there and I brought it over and I parked it in front of the hotel, I would have to get down on my hands and knees and look around to make sure nobody put a bomb on the thing because that occasionally happened as people would get in their Jeep and get blown to smithereens. So I would have to do that. And that's probably why I didn't drive the Jeep home too often. I don't know. I also had a driver who I could use and did use, maybe, and didn't use. I'm real fuzzy on that stuff because mostly what I did was the magazine. I was working on the magazine day and night pretty much at that time. But there was mischief afoot in Saigon. And now we talk about Dragon Lady. And Dragon Lady was a very attractive young woman who would ride around on her motorcycle, okay, and with her probably 45 probably, and she'd see somebody and she'd come up behind them and she'd yell, "Die, die, GI," and then she'd blow the guy away. So you kind of would keep an eye on this, and so actually in Saigon, I do remember this. I always carried my 45 and carried my 45 on one side, and I never loaded it. It was all and the bullets on the other side. So if I get some sort of firefight, reasonably, I guess I could get the gun out. So anyway, one day, Dragon Lady lines up. I think it was on a lieutenant colonel, and yells at him and through the central market area. And yells at him, "Die!" But she misses. And this guy's loaded for bear, you know. And he also knows that Dragon Lady tends to come around a second time if she doesn't hit you, you know. So wait for Dragon Lady, and here she comes, bam, 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 bam. Well, he misses her. How can well, you can't hit anything with a 45 unless you get lucky. But anyway, he missed her, and of course, presumably, I guess he thought he really scared the living daylights out of Dragon Lady, but he hadn't. Okay, Dragon Lady came around the third time, and his name is on the wall in the Vietnam wall on the she killed him. She got him. So you know, you kind of had to keep an eye out for stuff like that. How much time? 18? Written 18 minutes? Okay. Well, we're going to tell one more story here, and or maybe let's see what we got. Oh, we got plenty to do the next one with. So the next one will be about what we call the 5 o'clock follies. This is where the press mixed it up with every day at 5 o'clock, a block or two from my hotel over by the Opera House, they would hold a briefing to the press, and they would tell, among other things, this number got killed, these many missions we had, and the press was buying none of it. And the press called them the 5 o'clock follies, and I don't really know what the guys who were doing the briefing called the press, but they certainly didn't get along too well. So we'll start with the 5 o'clock follies the next time and tell some stories about that. And then we'll go to the roof of the Rex Hotel, where I ate very often when I was probably more at the roof of the continent there. And we'll talk about the Continental Hotel as well and its history. But that's coming next time.